In a forest where the river whispers and the wind remembers, a blind baby elephant once lay trembling, until a scarred old dog found her. What happened next would touch every soul who heard it. If stories of quiet love and second chances move you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and stay with us, because this story may just change how you see the wild and yourself. The morning fog rolled over the Umpqua National Forest like a thick silver river, cloaking the towering Douglas firs and winding trails in a quiet stillness. It was early autumn in western Oregon, the kind of morning where the sky stayed pale for hours, where the forest floor stayed damp, and the chill in the air hinted at winter's first breath. Birds had not yet begun their calls. The land seemed to hold its breath. Wade Forrester steered the dusty green Ranger truck through a narrow path carved between moss-covered trunks, the vehicle humming softly as it crept through the dense thickets. Wade, 66, had the kind of presence that turned silence into a companion. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and weather-worn, his skin leathery and freckled from decades under the sun, his gray beard neatly trimmed but full. His eyes, pale blue and deeply set, had witnessed wildfires, births, and the quiet passing of old animals deep in the woods. He carried himself with patience and quiet authority, the way only someone who had lost too much but kept showing up could. Wade had been a ranger since he was 21, back when maps were on paper and bear sightings were written by hand. His wife, Ruth, had once been a biologist at the same park, before a poacher's trap ended her work and left Wade with an ache that never quite dulled. Since then, he had turned inward, finding solace in trees, routines, and the slow rhythm of the wild. Beside him, her elbows on the dashboard, sat Julie Tran, 28, Vietnamese American, and freshly assigned to this district. Julie was everything Wade used to be. Full of questions, a notepad always at the ready, and heartstrings that tugged far too easily. She was slim, short with a sharp bob haircut, always tucked under a forest green cap, and had a nervous energy that made her speak too fast and care too much. She had graduated top of her class from UC Davis and chosen fieldwork over lab life, despite her mother's protests. Julie believed every creature was worth saving, and that belief hadn't been worn down by disappointment yet. They drove in silence until Wade murmured, "You feel that?" Julie blinked. "What?" "The woods are too quiet." He slowed the truck to a crawl. The silence wasn't just peaceful, it was off. No rustling, no distant deer steps, just the soft rattle of tires on gravel. Then Wade saw it, a break in the grass just to the right, near a small cluster of acacia trees. At first it looked like a mound of shadow, something hunched over, but it was moving, barely. He brought the vehicle to a stop. "Stay here," he said, though he knew she wouldn't. They stepped out. The air was sharp with pine and early frost. Julie clutched her notepad tightly, walking just behind Wade. As they neared the shadow, the outline began to sharpen. A large animal. No, two. Then she gasped. Curled against the flank of a large dog was something that didn't belong, a tiny gray elephant calf. It was emaciated, bones jutting through papery skin, and its eyes were clouded white, blind. Its ears fluttered weakly with each breath, and its trunk twitched in the grass like it was trying to make sense of the world through feel alone. And beside it, lying protectively, eyes sharp but not aggressive, was a German shepherd, large, muscular, but gaunt, with matted fur and a tail curled close to the elephant calf. His body was marked with scars, long and uneven, some old, some fresh. He looked like he had lived 100 winters alone, yet his expression was not feral. It was watching. "Is that a wild shepherd?" Julie whispered. Wade didn't answer. He was already kneeling. The dog didn't move, but its ears flicked toward Wade, alert but unafraid. Wade extended a hand slowly, palm out. "Easy, boy." The dog didn't growl. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the elephant calf, then back to Wade, as if to say, "Don't touch her unless you mean good." Julie crouched beside them, heart pounding. "The calf, she's blind," she murmured, reaching gently toward the trunk. The little elephant stirred and pressed its head deeper into the dog's fur, seeking warmth, familiarity, safety. "How in God's name did these two end up together?" Wade said, half to himself. Julie began snapping pictures, noting every detail. The position of their bodies, the dog's scars, the elephant's poor health. "We have to call this in," she said. "She needs help." "I know," Wade said, standing slowly, "but I don't think he's going to let her go that easy." Julie turned to him. "Then maybe he comes too." They loaded their radio, reporting the location and situation to the reserve's wildlife rehab center. Help was at least 2 hours away. Until then, they sat nearby, wrapped in the silence, watching. Julie scribbled in her notebook, 8:32 a.m., Umpqua Riverbend Sector. Fog lightning. Found an orphaned blind elephant calf. Female, eprox. 1 to 2 weeks old. Protective companion. Large male German shepherd, unknown origin. Behavior, non-aggressive, vigilant, possibly bonded. Unprecedented. She paused, then added, almost like a prayer, "They need each other." As the mist began to lift and golden light spilled through the trees, the scene remained unchanged. A wounded dog, eyes full of storms and stories, guarding a creature born blind into a world too harsh to see. There were no threats here, no predators, no roaring, only breath and warmth and the impossible stillness of something sacred. They would name the elephant Ellie. The dog, for now, had no name. But something in Wade stirred, an old, forgotten softness. He didn't say it aloud, but part of him hoped the dog would stay. Not just for Ellie, but for him too. The sun had barely breached the tree line when Wade Forrester stood a little farther from the German shepherd and the blind elephant calf, now softly breathing against each other under the thinning mist. The early morning chill had lifted, but something colder, something old and unwelcome, had returned to Wade's chest. As Julie busied herself with documenting every angle and detail of the animal's strange companionship, Wade found his gaze drifting beyond the trees, beyond the present. His feet were grounded in the soil of Umpqua, but his memory was back in the pine hollows of another Oregon forest, nearly 15 years ago. Ruth. Her name still carried weight in his lungs. Ruth Forrester had been a wildlife biologist, sharp, intuitive, compassionate to a fault. A woman with a voice like warm wood and hands that always smelled faintly of cedar. She had loved the wild with an almost religious reverence, never keeping distance from injured creatures, often nursing them back to life in their small cabin tucked behind the ranger station. And it was that same devotion that had led to her death. A poacher's snare, crude, rusted, had been hidden beneath a fern-laced trail where Ruth tracked a wounded elk. She had bled out before help could reach her. That day had carved a canyon into Wade's soul, one he'd filled with silence and work, but never closure. Now, standing here, he saw Ruth's spirit flicker in this improbable scene. A blind elephant calf trusting not instinct, but warmth. A scarred dog choosing not to attack, but to shelter. What was this if not evidence that something deeper, unspoken, existed in the heart of the wild? Julie knelt by a patch of brush, adjusting her camera lens with the careful touch of someone who knew how fragile moments could be. She had removed her ranger cap, her dark hair tumbling down her neck in soft, uneven strands, her eyes wide behind round glasses. "They're not just surviving," she murmured. "They're bonded. That dog, he's watching every breath she takes." Wade grunted softly but said nothing. Julie reached for her phone and opened the wildlife research app she'd helped develop during grad school. With steady fingers, she uploaded 3 short clips and a photo, the one where Ellie's trunk curled under the dog's chin, as if trying to feel his heartbeat. The submission went straight to Dr. Lena Petrova's inbox. Dr. Petrova was a Russian-born ethologist at UC Berkeley, a woman whose reputation for icy analysis was rivaled only by her obsession with social behaviors among large mammals. She was in her early 50s with salt and pepper hair always tied back into a bun and a gaze that saw right through excuses. Petrova had once been a concert violinist in Moscow before a spinal injury redirected her to a quieter passion, observing elephants. Now, she ran the Western Wildlife Cognition Lab and took particular interest in anomalies, animals that didn't behave the way textbooks said they should. By the time Julie's footage arrived, Dr. Petrova had just finished a Zoom lecture on matriarchal bonding in Asian elephants. She paused her tea mid-sip when the video loaded. Then she replayed it, then again. Within an hour, she called Julie directly. "This is not ordinary," Petrova said, her accent thick with urgency. "You must not move them yet. Let them be. I will send an observer. This could change how we understand adaptive empathy in mammals. Julie beamed. You think this is real then? Not just survival coincidence? Petrova paused. I think that dog is grieving something, and that elephant is responding to it. While Julie handled the scientific front, Wade took the quieter job of building a temporary shelter near the spot. He wasn't sure if the two animals would stay long, but instinct told him to prepare. He hammered posts into the soft earth, tied up waterproof tarps, and laid out a perimeter using scent barriers to deter coyotes. That afternoon, they were joined by a third ranger, Tom Gutierrez. Tom was in his 40s, Hispanic American, stocky with broad hands and a voice made for radio. He had a background in emergency animal rescue and a habit of telling corny jokes when stressed. He walked with a slight limp, a leftover from a mountain lion encounter 3 years back, and carried a small notebook where he sketched animals he encountered, sometimes giving them names. So, Tom said, squatting near the calf. We calling her Ellie, huh? Looks like she already knows it. The calf shifted slightly at his voice, ears fluttering. The dog, who still hadn't wandered more than 5 feet from her side, gave Tom a once-over before settling again. And the shepherd? He asked, looking to Wade. No name yet, Wade replied. He's not ours. Tom grinned. Then we better earn his trust. That night, as they set up a small campsite nearby, Wade sat by the fire, staring at the glow, while the dog lay curled beside Ellie under the trees. The fire cracked softly. Julie sat beside Wade, silent, before finally saying, I've never seen anything like this. It doesn't feel random. It feels meant. Wade exhaled slowly. Most things that matter usually do. She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw not just a stoic ranger, but a man still bleeding beneath the flannel and boots. What happened to your wife? She asked gently. Wade didn't flinch. He stared into the fire and said, She loved wild things, too much. She forgot some wild things love blood too. Julie reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Then, maybe it's a kind of answer, not to what was lost, but to what's still possible. Wade didn't respond, but in the distance the German shepherd lifted his head, stared straight at Wade for a long moment, then returned his head to Ellie's back. The morning after Dr. Petrova's call, mist again blanketed the woods, though lighter now, clinging to low shrubs and the cool bark of alder trees. The makeshift shelter had held through the night. Ellie, still weak but comforted, remained close to the German shepherd, who hadn't left her side once. The rangers took turns keeping watch, documenting behavior and setting small traps for rodents to keep other predators at bay. But the real surprise came not from the animals, but from the man who emerged at dawn, silent as a shadow. Wade was the first to spot him, an old figure approaching from the North Ridge Trail. He carried himself slowly, but with a soldier's posture, shoulders back, chin slightly up, gaze unflinching. The man wore an oversized green field jacket with a U.S. Army patch on the sleeve, faded jeans tucked into hiking boots, and a dark wool cap pulled low over snow-white hair. His beard was scraggly and gray, matching the tiredness behind his eyes. In one hand, he held a walking stick carved with notches, each mark like a tally of years lived alone. Wade stepped forward, cautious but respectful. "Can I help you, sir?" The man squinted, then looked past Wade directly at the dog. "My name's Carl," he said, voice low and weathered. "And if that dog's who I think he is, then you don't need to help me. You already did." Julie, startled, approached, notepad in hand. "You know this dog?" Carl nodded slowly. "That's Ranger." The name sent a shift through the air. The German shepherd's ears perked. His body didn't move, but his eyes locked on Carl. A stillness passed between them, one too deep to be casual. Wade frowned. "You're sure?" Carl stepped closer, slowly, cautiously. "He was my partner. I trained him myself. Afghanistan, 2011. He found 6 IEDs in 3 days, saved 3 units. They retired him early after a shoulder injury, nerve damage on his front right. We came back stateside, thought we'd live quiet." Julie leaned in. "What happened?" Carl's gaze dropped to the ground. "The wildfires 3 years ago, the ones that tore through the North Umpqua Valley. I lived off-grid, had a small cabin. He was with me. When the smoke hit, everything moved too fast. I turned around and he was gone." His voice cracked. "We searched for days." They said no dog could survive that heat, but I never stopped hoping. Julie crouched near the dog, now Ranger. Did you call for him? Carl didn't respond with words. Instead, he stepped a few feet closer, took a deep breath, and spoke clearly. Ranger, at ease. The dog's body flinched, subtle but unmistakable. His tail gave one slow wag, then settled. His eyes softened. The elephant calf stirred beside him, nuzzling closer. But Ranger didn't shift. He looked back at Carl recognition. Yes, but not return. Not yet. Wade watched silently. Looks like he remembers. Carl sat on a log near the edge of the shelter, wincing as his knees bent. He's different, he said, voice quiet. He's not mine anymore. Julie looked between the two. You raised him? From 12 weeks old, Carl nodded. After the army, he was all I had. Smart, serious, didn't even bark at fireworks. Had a gentleness people didn't expect in war dogs. And yet, he chose to live out here alone, Wade said. Carl shrugged. Not alone, apparently. They sat in silence as the forest awakened around them. Chickadees chirped cautiously. A squirrel rustled in the underbrush. Julie took out her camera, but hesitated. Do you want to take him back? She asked Carl. He looked long at the dog, at the graying muzzle, the wary stance, the scars along his ribs. I think he's already where he needs to be. By noon, a small team from the Umpqua Wildlife Observation Center arrived. Among them was Dr. Mason Riley, a middle-aged behavioral ecologist with shaggy chestnut hair, a windbreaker always zipped too high, and a personality that straddled scientific curiosity and camp counselor enthusiasm. He set down his pack, knelt with binoculars in hand, and began noting Ranger and Ellie's interactions. This, he said, wide-eyed, is extraordinary. This isn't just cohabitation, it's attunement. He adjusts his breathing when she stirs. When a blue jay called from that tree, he gestured, he shifted his body to cover her. That's learned protective behavior, not instinct. Carl listened from the background, arms crossed. He didn't speak again. Not much, but his presence changed something. Julie noticed that Ranger occasionally flicked an ear toward Carl's footsteps, like he was keeping him in his periphery. Later that afternoon, Julie interviewed Carl for the record. He sat by a pile of stones, carving a small piece of driftwood with a pocket knife. I don't think Ranger's just surviving out here, he said. I think he's fulfilling something. Like what? Julie asked. Carl didn't look up. Like a final mission. That evening, under amber light spilling through the canopy, Ranger finally stood up and walked 5 feet away from Ellie for the first time. He circled once, then returned to her side, but the moment marked a shift. He was testing distance, re-engaging with the world, and when Wade looked up from his chair near the fire and met Carl's gaze, something unspoken passed between them. The kind of nod men give each other when they've both carried things too heavy, too long. Rain came soft and steady that morning, a whispering mist that clung to the treetops and soaked into the moss-covered floor of Umpqua. The forest, once full of quiet marvels and unexpected turns, now felt like a held breath. Ranger and Ellie had not moved far from the makeshift shelter Wade had constructed a few days earlier, but everything about their presence had shifted. What began as unlikely companionship now resembled devotion, complete and quiet, like two beings orbiting the same invisible star. Ellie, though still small and underweight, had started responding more acutely to her surroundings. She flapped her ears at certain sounds, raised her trunk cautiously when Ranger shifted, and pressed her body closer to his in moments of alarm. Ranger had become more than a protector. He was her compass, her warmth, her familiar. When it rained, he positioned himself so his body covered her head and trunk. When a raccoon wandered too near, he stood like stone between them, tail rigid, ears forward, saying without growl or bark, not one step closer. Julie watched them from a dry perch under a tarp. Her camera sat unused in her lap, hands still, breath soft. It felt wrong to frame this moment through a lens. It was too sacred. She had spent hours reviewing the footage and reports from Dr. Riley, who had confirmed that Ranger's behavior mirrored bonded pair instincts, seen in species like wolves and elephants, but never across such a divide. This is not mimicry, he had said. This is allegiance. That word echoed now in Julie's head as she wrapped her rain jacket tighter. She turned to Wade, who stood by the fire pit, arms crossed, watching the canopy drip. We can't leave them out here much longer, she said gently. The weather's going to turn. I know, he replied. His voice was gruff but low, as though speaking too loud might shatter something delicate in the air. We need to move her to Haven Ridge, she said, referring to the wildlife rehabilitation sanctuary several hours south. They have heated enclosures, dietary experts, vet access. She could recover properly there. And leave him behind? Wade looked over, not accusing, but haunted. Julie hesitated. We could try to bring him too. You think he'll follow? I don't know, she said honestly. I think if we separate them, it might break her. Wade was quiet for a long moment. The fire hissed softly. And what if keeping them together breaks him? Julie blinked. What do you mean? He's not meant for cages, Wade said. I've seen dogs like him, war-trained, trauma-soaked. You take away their autonomy and they shut down. You put him in a fenced yard, surround him with unfamiliar hands, and he'll stop eating. Or worse. She swallowed. So what do we do? Wade turned away and stared at the fog-draped trees. I don't know yet, but we can't rush it. As the rain lightened, they were joined by a new figure, Dr. Shira Lentz, a veterinary behavioral specialist from Portland. She was in her early 40s, with short auburn curls, dark eyes lined with exhaustion, and a tone that oscillated between clinical precision and maternal warmth. She had once worked with rescue canines in post-disaster zones, earthquakes, floods, war sites, animals that had seen too much and spoke through silence. She carried a waterproof pack and a clipboard wrapped in plastic, her boots muddied to the ankles. Dr. Lentz, Julie greeted, offering her a dry seat. We appreciate you making the trip. Shira gave a short nod. Once I saw the footage, I had to. This isn't just rare, it's a psychological event, mutual imprinting, likely trauma-bonded. She looked toward Ranger and Ellie, her gaze softening. That dog's not just guarding her. He's rebuilding something inside himself. She spent the next hour quietly observing, making small notes, refraining from any interaction. Ranger, at first wary, eventually tolerated her presence. Ellie seemed to respond to her humming voice, a melody Shira said she used with rescue horses. Later, over lunch near the base camp, Shira offered her preliminary thoughts. I think Wade's right, she said, looking at him directly. If you separate them now, without a plan that eases that transition, you risk psychological collapse in both. Julie frowned. So, what's the alternative? A phased integration, Shira explained. You build trust, slowly. You bring Haven Ridge to them, bit by bit. A vet visit here, Ellie's nutrition tailored on site, minimal restraint, and only when the dog chooses, you invite him in. Carl, who had been quiet most of the morning, finally spoke up. He doesn't belong to anyone anymore, not even me, but he's still a soldier. If he senses the mission is ending, he might not stay. Julie's voice cracked slightly. But Ellie can't survive out here forever. She won't, Shira said, but she won't survive if her heart breaks either. That evening, as the clouds broke and a pale gold light filtered through the dripping forest, Julie recorded one last journal entry before bed. Her voice was soft. Field notes, day 12. Ellie's dependency on Ranger is no longer just behavioral, it's emotional. Ranger's acceptance of human presence has increased slightly, though still no direct interaction. Wade continues to monitor the site, while Carl provides critical insight into Ranger's past conditioning. Dr. Lentz has proposed phased relocation, subject to approval. She looked across the camp to where Ranger lay curled around Ellie once more. Ellie's eyes, still milky with blindness, were closed in rest, trunk gently moving against Ranger's chest. Julie whispered into the recorder, I don't know who saved who anymore. The sky darkened without warning, a sudden bruising of the clouds that turned the entire forest a shade darker, as if someone had pulled a curtain over the sun. The air shifted first, humid, tense, and heavy with the electric scent of ozone. Birds went silent, and even the wind held its breath. Wade felt it in his bones before he saw it. A storm was coming, and it wasn't going to be gentle. Julie had just returned from a brief supply run to the ranger station when she noticed the unusual pressure in the air. Her phone buzzed with a weather alert. Flash flood warnings across the southern ridge of Umpqua. Her stomach dropped. Wade stood near the tarp shelter, his eyes narrowed toward the treetops where branches already trembled. We need to move them, he said, voice clipped. They're too close to the waterline, Julie added, already grabbing her waterproof pack. Ellie and Ranger had been resting near a stream that fed into the Umpqua River, normally shallow, barely a trickle, but now it threatened to become a torrent. The narrow bank where they found comfort was about to be swallowed. Carl emerged from his own lean-to, already wearing his army surplus poncho. His face, usually unreadable, looked alarmed. "This isn't just rain," he said. "This'll rip through lowlands like a blade." They didn't waste another second. Carl grabbed a rope, Julie checked the sedative kit for emergencies, and Wade stuffed a thermal blanket into his backpack. As the wind picked up and thunder cracked faintly in the distance, the three of them set off into the woods, boots sinking into the softening earth. The path was already hard to follow. Rain came sideways in bursts, driven by gusts that tugged at branches and turned the trail into a series of shifting brown streams. Carl moved ahead, guided not by GPS, but by instinct, his knowledge of the land and of Ranger's old habits proving more reliable than technology in the storm. After nearly 40 minutes of hiking through mud, crossing one fallen log bridge, and skirting a rapidly swelling tributary, they spotted the glint of wet fur through the trees. Ranger was struggling. The German shepherd's body was slick with rain, his frame visibly trembling with effort. His teeth were gently tugging at Ellie's trunk, trying to guide her up a narrow incline toward higher ground. Ellie, blind and frightened by the rush of water and the cacophony of thunder, stood frozen at the edge of a rock ledge. The river had risen quickly, turning the base of the hill into a dangerous, muddy pit. "Ranger!" Carl shouted over the wind. The dog turned his head, eyes wide, recognizing the voice but not breaking his position. His body was stretched, legs planted in soaked earth, anchoring Ellie with the last of his strength. Julie ran forward, kneeling beside them. "Easy, Ellie," she whispered, trying to soothe the calf, who began to sway slightly in panic. "We're here now." Carl secured the rope around a nearby tree, while Wade took the loop and moved carefully down toward the elephant. "We need to create a harness," he shouted. "Fast!" Julie and Carl worked quickly, using the rope, 2 canvas slings from the rescue pack, and their own jackets to fashion a crude support under Ellie's belly. The elephant was too frightened to move, so Wade stood beside Ranger and placed a hand on his back. "She trusts you," Wade said softly. "You lead. We'll follow." Ranger blinked, chest heaving. Then, slowly, he stepped forward up the incline, nudging Ellie gently with his nose. The calf followed, step by trembling step, while Julie and Carl braced the rope and guided from behind. Rain stung their faces, and the sound of rushing water below grew louder with every second. Just as they reached a flat patch of ground 10 feet above the river's new edge, a deafening crack split the air. A tree behind them gave way, falling with a splash and sealing off their escape route. They had made it just in time. Everyone collapsed momentarily, breathless, wet to the bone. Ranger lay beside Ellie, both of them panting from effort and stress. Julie knelt beside them, her hands shaking, tears mixing with the rain. She placed her forehead against Ellie's rough skin and whispered, "You did so good, girl. You're safe." Carl crouched beside Ranger, who didn't move away. Instead, the dog pressed his head lightly into Carl's chest. A brief gesture, but it broke something in the man. Carl's eyes filled, and he pulled Ranger into an embrace, whispering something in a voice only the dog could hear. Wade stood over them all, hands on his hips, watching. His chest was tight, not from fear or fatigue, but something deeper: reverence. In all his years among animals, among storms and survival stories, he had never seen anything like this. By nightfall, the rain had stopped, leaving behind a sky smeared with clouds and a scent of petrichor hanging over the land like incense. They made camp farther uphill, on a dry patch of earth beneath an overhang. A small fire crackled against the stone, warming wet hands and calming frayed nerves. Dr. Lentz, who had stayed behind during the storm, arrived the next morning with 2 assistants. When she saw the mud-covered group and the exhausted dog curled beside the sleeping elephant, she only said, "I guess the storm made the choice for us." Julie looked up. "What do you mean?" "She's bonded to him beyond rescue protocol now," Shira said, pulling off her gloves. "We'll need to relocate both, together." No one objected. The drive to Haven Ridge took over 4 hours. The narrow forest road wound through the Oregon highlands, dipping into valleys still soaked from the storm and rising into sunlit ridges where morning light broke gently through evergreens. In the back of the customized transport trailer, Ellie lay nestled in a padded enclosure, her breathing steady though her body trembled from the unfamiliar movement. Ranger lay curled against her, not tethered, not restrained. He stayed by choice. His eyes remained alert the entire time, watching shadows move along the walls, his body never fully relaxing. Julie sat up front in the passenger seat of the convoy's lead vehicle, her hands folded in her lap, worry and hope twisting in equal measure across her face. She wore her usual ranger green jacket, sleeves pushed up despite the chill, revealing forearms dotted with tiny scars and insect bites, souvenirs from weeks in the wild. Every so often, she would glance back through the cab window to the trailer, making sure the two beings who had changed her life were still there. Wade drove with the calm steadiness of a man used to carrying weight literal and otherwise. Next to him, Carl rode in silence, his weathered hands gripping the edge of his seat. He had cleaned up slightly, beard trimmed, new boots, his old field jacket patched up with care, but he still carried that air of someone who had lived on the edge of things for too long. Now, though, something softer was forming in the lines of his face. He had been offered a role at the Haven Animal Behavior Assistant, with housing included, and though he hadn't accepted out loud, his presence in the truck spoke volumes. The Haven itself sat nestled in a protected valley just outside Bend, Oregon. Surrounded by natural barriers and old-growth trees, it was more sanctuary than facility. Founded by Dr. Helena Monroe, an environmental psychologist in her late 60s with a fondness for herbal tea and classical piano, the center specialized in rehabilitating wildlife with complex trauma. Helena was small, with sharp gray eyes and a soft, melodic voice that could calm even the most frantic creature. Her white braid was always tucked neatly beneath a wide-brimmed straw hat, and her presence alone made people lower their voices instinctively. When the vehicles pulled in, Helena was already waiting at the entry gate with two veterinary staff and a husky named Olive, who served as a kind of emotional support ambassador for new arrivals. Olive was 8 years old, thick-coated with one blue eye and one brown, and a gentle, almost maternal energy. She padded forward quietly when the trailer opened. Ellie's trunk twitched first, followed by a soft grunt. Ranger rose to his feet slowly, tense at the new scents and sounds. Olive approached with a slow, sideways gait, non-threatening. Ranger stood between her and Ellie, low growl humming in his chest, but Olive only sat down at a distance, ears relaxed, gaze low. She was signaling respect. Ranger watched for a full minute before relaxing his stance, stepping aside just enough for Ellie to breathe in the new air. "Good boy," Carl whispered from the doorway. Ellie took her first steps onto the new earth hesitantly, one foot dragging slightly. The ground beneath her had been carefully prepared, soft with hay and bark mulch, scattered with familiar smells from their previous enclosure. Ranger stayed at her side, every muscle coiled but steady. It took nearly 20 minutes to guide them to the specially designed habitat, a half-acre space surrounded by trees, with a shaded shelter, a small artificial stream, and feeding stations hidden among natural foliage. The adjustment wasn't instant. Ellie refused to eat the first day. She paced in uneven circles, trunk constantly searching, tapping, testing. At night, she curled tightly against Ranger, shivering until the air warmed. But by the third day, she accepted a mango slice from Julie's hand. And by the fifth, she ventured toward the stream and let her feet sink into the cool water. Ranger, too, began to shift. For the first time in weeks, he accepted food from someone other than Carl. He didn't bark or snap or retreat. He took the jerky from Helena's outstretched palm, stared at her for a long beat, then walked away. It was enough. Julie, in her new role as outreach coordinator, launched a program for local elementary schools called The Quiet Bond. Once a week, small groups of students visited the Haven to hear the story of Ellie and Ranger, not as a spectacle, but as a lesson in empathy. She stood beneath the cedar canopy, wearing a wide-brimmed Ranger hat too big for her face, reading aloud from a journal she'd written during the rescue. Her voice, though small, held the power of lived experience. "The wild teaches us things we forget," she told them one morning. "That strength isn't always loud, that love can bloom in silence, and that sometimes healing looks like an old dog lying beside a blind elephant, neither saying a word." The children were mesmerized. Some asked if Ellie would ever see again. Julie answered gently, "Maybe not with her eyes, but I think she sees with something deeper now. Helena approached Julie after one session. "You've found your place here," she said. Julie smiled, eyes still following the students as they waved goodbye to Ellie, who stood under the shade beside Ranger, ears fluttering at the voices. "Maybe we all have," she replied. Carl had taken up residence in a small cabin near the back of the sanctuary. He spent his mornings walking the outer perimeter, checking fences, scattering fresh straw, and keeping track of Ranger's behavior on a clipboard that now bore his handwriting. In the evenings, he sat by the fire pit outside the main lodge, carving wood into small animal shapes: an owl, a deer, a curled fox. He gave one to each child who visited, never asking for thanks. That night, as dusk painted the hills in lavender and gold, Wade stood by the fence watching Ellie sleep beside Ranger under the open stars. He felt no urge to speak, only to witness. After a while, Helena joined him, holding 2 mugs of tea. She handed him one. "She's adjusting," she said softly. "So is he," Wade replied. Helena looked at him, her expression unreadable but kind. "And you?" He sipped the tea, then nodded. "Maybe we all are." The air in the haven shifted subtly as autumn deepened, cooler mornings, amber leaves crunching underfoot, and the distant calls of migrating geese overhead. For Ellie, now stronger and more confident, the rhythm of her days had become gentle and predictable. She had memorized the curves of her habitat, the edges of the stream she loved to wade into, and the location of every tree that gave her shade. Ranger, graying at the muzzle, still walked beside her each morning, though his steps had grown slower, and he now rested more frequently in the afternoons under the cedar canopy. Julie had started to notice the change in Ranger's energy. He no longer sprang to attention at every sound. His ears twitched, yes, but the urgency was fading. Carl, too, had begun shortening their patrols together. "He's winding down," Carl had said one morning, gently stroking Ranger's ears. "But he's doing it his way." One crisp morning in late October, the rhythm of Haven Ridge changed. A convoy of animal transport vehicles arrived, kicking up red dust from the gravel path. At the center of the operation was Dr. Veena Sandhu, a wildlife relocation specialist in her early 40s, known for her work with displaced elephant herds across the Pacific Northwest. Veena had dark skin, sharp cheekbones, and wore her thick curly black hair pulled into a loose braid that swung across her back as she moved. Her voice was calm but commanding, and her presence radiated trust, especially with animals. 5 elephants had been relocated from an Idaho wildlife park that was shutting down due to mismanagement. Among them were 2 adolescent males, one elderly bull and a mother with her juvenile calf. The group had been kept in cramped quarters for over a year, underfed, overstimulated, and, most heartbreakingly, emotionally disconnected. Veena hoped that the haven could offer them not just space, but healing. As the herd was released into their new enclosure, a vast grassy field bordered by low hills and forest, Julie and Helena watched from the overlook. "How do you think Ellie will react?" Helena asked softly. Julie hesitated. "She's never been around her own kind, not since we found her. I think she's going to be overwhelmed." That afternoon, Ellie stood at the edge of her enclosure, trunk swaying, ears fluttering in agitation. She could smell them, other elephants, powerful and familiar in ways her mind couldn't yet explain. Ranger sat beside her, head slightly lowered, watching her carefully. When the wind changed, carrying the scent of the new herd directly to her, Ellie took an uncertain step forward, then another. But, just as quickly, she froze. Her trunk curled in tightly. Her body quivered. She backed away. "She's scared," Carl murmured from his watch post. "She doesn't know what to do," Julie added. "It's instinct clashing with experience." Ranger didn't move for a moment. Then, as though sensing something in Ellie that even the humans couldn't, he stood up, nudged her flank gently with his nose, and walked ahead toward the fence line that separated her space from the newcomers. He stopped just short of the divider, sat down, and waited. Ellie hesitated. Her ears twitched toward him, her foot lifted. And then, slowly, with breath shaking and heart pounding, she followed. Veena watched the scene unfold beside Helena. "That dog!" He's more than her guide. He's her anchor. Over the next few days, a slow ritual began. Ellie approached the fence for longer periods, staying near the mother elephant, an older female named Sita, who had a reputation for patience and gentleness. Sita would often extend her trunk toward Ellie, not pushing, not demanding, just offering scent, space, and quiet. On the fourth day, a remarkable moment occurred. As the sun dipped low and golden across the trees, Sita extended her trunk again, and this time Ellie reached back. Ellie, their trunks touched, entwined for a brief second, and Ellie let out a soft, breathy rumble. Julie caught it on camera, her hands trembling. "That's the first time she's vocalized near them," she whispered. Later that night, Ellie didn't sleep curled beside Ranger. She lay near the fence, facing Sita, with her body relaxed in a way it hadn't been since arrival. Ranger didn't protest. He watched from his usual spot under the tree, his eyes reflecting the stars above, and rested his head on his front paws. Carl sat nearby, whittling another small figure, a miniature elephant this time, with its trunk lifted skyward. "She's choosing," he said softly. Julie nodded. "She's beginning to belong." The next morning, the gates between the enclosures were slowly opened under Vina's supervision. Sita walked calmly into Ellie's space, alone, while the rest of the herd stayed back. Ellie stepped forward, uncertain, then pressed her head lightly into Sita's shoulder. From the shade, Ranger watched. His ears lifted. His tail gave a faint, satisfied wag. By evening, Ellie had joined Sita in the larger enclosure, and the other elephants began approaching slowly. Ranger remained on the other side, now separated by the fence. He didn't try to follow. He didn't need to. That night, for the first time, Ranger didn't sleep under the stars beside Ellie. He lay beneath the old cedar, the one where he and Carl often sat together, and closed his eyes. Carl found him there, breathing deep, calm. He sat down beside him in silence. "You did it, old man," he murmured. "You got her home." Ranger didn't respond. He didn't have to. He simply sighed, and in the peace of the forest night, drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. The river had not changed much. Its banks, once muddy and uncertain, had settled into a graceful curve, flowing gently through the sanctuary grounds. Moss now clung to the stones and rich green tapestries, and the water carried the soft murmur of time, steadily, endlessly, as though whispering stories to the trees that lined its edges. Julie Tran stood beneath the cedar archway, marking the education path of the haven, her once ranger green jacket now replaced with a soft slate blue field coat bearing the embroidered crest, Director of Wildlife Compassion and Education. Years had shaped her face gently, lines at the eyes from squinting into sunlight. A few silver strands woven into her dark hair, but her posture was upright, calm, deeply present. The same sharp, curious fire lived behind her glasses, only steadier now. Today she guided a group of fifth-grade students from the nearby town of Oak Bend on their annual Compassion Walk, a program she had founded to instill emotional literacy through encounters with nature. The children followed in a loose, chatter-filled wave, backpacks bouncing, their sneakers crunching across gravel. At the bend of the path, near a slow-moving stretch of the river, Ellie stood now, a full-grown elephant, her shoulders broad and scarred, her trunk long and nimble, her presence quiet but magnetic. The younger elephants gathered loosely around her, mimicking her movements, trusting her pauses. She had grown into her strength with quiet certainty. Never aggressive, always deliberate, the matriarch of a small but thriving herd. "She doesn't need to see to lead," Julie said, turning to the students. "She listens, she feels vibrations, she memorizes routes, and she trusts others to help her navigate what she cannot touch." A hand rose among the group, a girl named Kira, all elbows and oversized glasses. "Is it true she was raised by a dog?" Julie smiled softly. "Not just a dog, a German shepherd named Ranger. He found her when she was just a calf alone, blind and afraid. And he stayed. He protected her. He taught her to trust again." She led the children a little farther down the trail, to a small stone clearing by the river's edge. There, nestled among river grass and reeds, stood a sculpture, not grand, not polished, but carved with care. A life-size depiction of a young elephant calf, eyes closed, standing beside a sitting German shepherd, his gaze turned slightly upward, his body angled toward hers. Their figures touched at the shoulder. A bronze plaque rested beneath it, weathered by seasons but still clear. "Where the river waits, for kindness never fades." The children fell silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Carl had carved the original model years ago, before he left the Haven to retire in the Sierra foothills. He had sent the design with a handwritten note. He never wanted thanks, just a place to wait. Julie crouched beside the sculpture now, brushing a leaf from its base. She glanced at the water, then at the trees that lined the horizon, golden in the afternoon light. "When we say compassion matters," she said to the children, "we don't just mean toward people. We mean across species, across silence, across fear." Behind her, Helena Monroe, now a mentor emerita at the sanctuary, stood, watching. Though mostly retired, she visited monthly, walking the grounds with a cane carved from driftwood and wearing the same straw hat she had worn the day Ellie arrived. Her white braid had thinned, but her voice still carried the melodic certainty of someone who had seen too much beauty to grow cynical. "They'll remember this," Helena murmured to Julie as they stood side by side, "even if they don't understand it yet." Julie nodded. "Ranger taught me that you don't always need to be understood, just present." As the children wandered back up the trail, Julie stayed a moment longer by the sculpture. The river sparkled in the sun. Ellie, now napping under the shade with two calves tucked near her flank, stirred and let out a soft breath. Ranger's tree, the cedar where he once lay in his final seasons, still stood nearby, its roots firm, its branches stretching skyward. Julie reached into her coat and pulled out a worn leather notebook, the one she had started so many years ago. She flipped to the final page, one that bore no notes, just a quote she had once scribbled during a sleepless night beside the campfire. "In the wild, love speaks without a word, and when it does, the whole forest listens." She closed the notebook gently and stood, her shadow falling between the sculpture and the flowing water. That night, after the children had gone and the sanctuary had quieted, Julie returned once more to the river. She sat alone this time, beneath the stars, wrapped in a quilt Helena had given her years ago. The river was darker now, but still singing. As the moonlight washed over the landscape, Ellie's distant rumble echoed faintly across the field, a low, familiar call. Julie smiled to herself. "He's still here, isn't he?" she whispered to the night, waiting. And the river, as it always had, carried the answer in silence. Sometimes the most extraordinary miracles begin with the quietest acts of love: a wounded dog who stayed, a blind elephant who trusted, and a bond that healed more than just bodies, but souls. Perhaps that too is how God works in our lives, not always with thunder or fire, but with silent guardians, unexpected friendships, and rivers that wait patiently for us to find our way home. In a world that often feels loud and broken, stories like Ellie and Ranger remind us kindness never fades, and no one is ever truly lost. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below and say, "Amen," if you believe that compassion is one of God's quiet miracles. Subscribe to our channel for more true stories of love, healing, and the grace that still moves among us. May God bless you for watching.